Welcome everybody. I am remote, so I'm going to be turning this meeting over to Louisa tonight, but I'm glad to see you all.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening, everyone. Do you want to do the land acknowledgement to kick us off?
Sure. I think we usually do the review and approve the agenda first, but I could just do the...
Sure.
Okay.
Has everyone reviewed the agenda? Does anyone make a motion to approve?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second. Any opposed? I'll approve. Abstentions? Great. No approved. Now, before we approve the October meeting minutes, perhaps Laura could do a land acknowledgement.
Yes, I will. And Ian, did you need to say anything before?
Yeah, I was hoping to do a very quick housekeeping script.
Okay.
So I think, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. And just a couple quick housekeeping notes before we begin this evening's meeting. I think we first want to do a quick sound check with those joining us via Zoom, and particularly for those who are joining us as attendees via Zoom. I'm going to lower your hand. If you could actually raise your hand if you can hear us talking and the sound is working, that would be really helpful. I'm going to take this as yes, that you can hear us. I'm going to put down your hand again, and I'll get back to having hands raised in terms of public comments, but thank you for that. And hopefully we have sorted our sound issue, which is a good thing. So for the members of the public who are joining the meeting via computer, device, or phone, please be advised that your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. Commissioners, and this is Chair Allen for you, as a panelist, you can mute and unmute your video and mic at your discretion, but we ask that you please mute yourself when you're not speaking to avoid any feedback and background noise. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of this meeting, please raise your hand after I've gone through these housekeeping notes to join the speakers queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click the blue hand icon. And for those listening to the meeting on the phone, press *9. For the comment period, we will first give an opportunity for those joining us via Zoom to comment, then an opportunity for anyone who has joined us in person to do the same. We will lower hands as speakers are called upon, and when the public comment period begins, we will announce your name, unmute your microphone, and you have 2 minutes to comment, after which your microphone will again be muted. Regarding the chat and QA functionality on Zoom, please note that attendees will not be able to use these features. Lastly, I just wanted to thank everybody for their continued patience, flexibility, and good humor as we continue to experiment with ways to meet safely and hear from members of the community and fix our technical issues. As always, feel free to contact the Sustainability Commission if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get it to us in a different format. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to Lisa.
Thank you so much, Ian. Okay. Laura, I'll hand it back to you briefly before we approve the October meeting minutes.
Thanks. So this year I'm wanting to go beyond land acknowledgements. So looking at what personal actions we can take to support Indigenous people in this area. Last month, they talked about the Kalapuya Dictionary. That's an ongoing effort to revitalize the language. And so this month, I wanted to share some efforts being made to change the name of Lane County to Kalapuya County. And some of you might already be aware of this. It's been ongoing for a couple of years now, and there was some movement this summer. But just in case you aren't, I wanted to bring it up at our meeting today. So this would be honoring the original Indigenous people of this area by changing the name of the county. And for those of you who don't know, Lane County is named after Joseph Lane. He was Oregon's first territorial governor. He was pro-slavery, a Confederate sympathizer, and he approved of the murder of Native Americans in this area. In June of 2020, 2 people of Kalapuya ancestry, David Lewis and Esther Stutzman, they brought a petition for this name change. And their petition details the history of Joseph Lane and his treatment of Native people. There's another petition that has kind of been circulating, trying to get wider spread signatures that you could sign if you are interested, and that would be supporting the effort. So Lane County commissioners have taken this up and talked about it, but they're currently looking into it. So there's nothing actively happening around this issue right now. So that is it.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was insightful. Appreciate it. Moving ahead with our meeting tonight, we will need to approve October meeting minutes. Everyone had the opportunity to review it, and are there any requests to update or change those minutes? None. Does everyone have a movement to approve? Thank you, Jan.
Second.
Fantastic. All agreement? Jan, I'm assuming you're included in that.
Oh, yeah.
The two
sorry.
motion.
Of course.
So thank you. We can now move ahead with public comment. Any member of the public to share with us tonight?
Good evening, please go ahead.
My name is Lynn Woodridge, and I'm a resident of Ward 6 and also Ward 8. I have a home in Ward 8. I've been there in 25 years, and I'm talking to you in support of the public health overlay zone that will help West Eugene. I'm also the co-chair of the Active Bethel community, and we sent a statement of support letter to the Eugene Mayor and City Council in September. And many neighborhoods have long suffered from an inequitable pollution burden, with over 95% of all air toxics in Eugene emitted in the 97402 zip code. And we would really like to have this public health overlay zone to protect our residents. So I'm asking for your support. And I know that we're going to be doing another work session with the City Council soon. So again, please support us in this endeavor. Thank you.
Any other comment tonight? Seeing none, any commissioners would like to respond to Lynn? Jan, go ahead.
Thank you very much for commenting, Lynn, and I'm very pleased that we have this on our agenda and look forward to learning more about it and appreciate your input. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you, Lynn, because and I think coming from the neighbors is very helpful as well, because the people who are living in a reality of a very different neighborhood than many parts of town. And we'll be discussing that further in our agenda on the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. At this point, we are ready for a presentation to the commission on climate-friendly and equitable communities by city staff.
Good evening. Good evening, sustainability commissioners and those watching online. My name is Heather O'Donnell, and I'm a senior planner with the Planning Division, and I'll be providing the bulk of the overview tonight on the state of Oregon's new rules called Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities. And joining me in the presentation is Rob Innerfeld, who is the Transportation Planning Manager. So as reflected with this joint presentation, and as you'll see or get a feel of in the following slides, the new rules really have quite a bit of overlap with existing city projects and programs. So just touch briefly on the agenda. We'll start with the background for establishing the rules, some of which you may all be familiar with, and how the rules overlap, as I mentioned, with other city efforts. The bulk of the presentation will be an overview of each of the different components that will be required to be implemented. And then we'll wrap up the presentation by touching on next steps. And I'll just say ahead of time, there's a lot of information in this presentation. It's a little bit lengthy. We definitely think there will be some time at the end for questions, but just get ready for a bit of a file.
It's a pause, I think. So this screen is what the people online are seeing.
Thank you.
They're actually, they'll be seeing that.
But I think they are seeing this online. That's what the comment just said in the chat.
Oh, the comment in the chat said that?
Yeah.
We don't have to have it in presentation mode. We can just, because I have my notes here, so. Thank you for letting us know, Leah and audience. So hopefully, I don't know if there's a way to know if this is visible enough for folks online. But someone will let us know if it's not. All right. So moving on, so first we'll start with why the state finds these rules to be necessary. Most of this information is probably not new to this group. In 2007, the Oregon legislature adopted a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 70%, 75% below what they were in Oregon in 1990, and doing that by 2050. According to the state, as far as that goal goes, Oregon is particularly off track in reducing pollution from transportation, which is responsible for about 38% of Oregon's climate pollution. Oregon, including Lane County, as we all know, have seen recent wildfires, heat waves, and flooding that have resulted in deaths, loss of housing, and major economic damages. Studies also show that Eugene's climate is forecast to change, with dry months becoming hotter and drier with increased wildfires, and wet months having more rain and flooding with less snowpack. The state estimates that on Oregon's current path, transportation pollution would only be reduced by 20% by 2050. And this chart on the slide shows in gray the gap between Oregon's current trajectory, which is the top line, and Oregon's 2050 goal, which is the bottom line. So in addition, the state has found that Oregon also has a history of discrimination and racism, including in land use and transportation decisions, which have disproportionately impacted communities of color, displacing and dividing communities, and limiting access to housing in neighborhoods and access to housing choice. Studies have shown that climate impacts are also disproportionately felt by lower income community members and communities of color. In response to these findings, Governor Brown issued an executive order in 2020 directing state agencies, which actually ended up impacting about 17 state agencies, to take actions to reduce and regulate greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change, while at the same time centering the needs of Oregon's most vulnerable communities. The governor also reinforced meeting the statutory greenhouse gas emission reduction target I was just talking about. So this chart, which might be a little bit hard to read, shows Oregon's current trend in the middle bar compared to the 2050 goal on the far right bar. To implement the executive order, the state's subsequent rulemaking process aimed to significantly strengthen Oregon's administrative rules so that transportation and housing planning result in further pollution reduction and more equitable outcomes. The new rules focus mainly on Oregon's 8 largest urban areas with populations over 50,000, and so that includes the Eugene-Springfield area, and added specific standards regarding underserved communities and requiring equity analysis in land use and transportation planning decisions. The rulemaking process had an advisory committee. Rob was the city's representative. I was added later as an alternate. The rulemaking process is now over. The state adopted temporary rules in May, and then the final rules were published at the end of August. So with transportation accounting for 38% of Oregon's climate pollution, the state found that in order to reduce driving, cities' land use and transportation plans and their land use regulations need to really work together to bring land uses closer to each other in certain areas, where there's a mixture of uses that allows people to live, work, and play together. And that these plans also create infrastructure that's more supportive to biking, walking, and transit. At the same time, the rules require that when plans and regulations are updated to address this and reduce pollution, that they also do so in a way that increases housing choice and creates more equitable outcomes. So that, and it does this so that the needs of historically marginalized populations are met in an equitable and inclusive way. So to achieve these goals, the framework to grow in a compact and pedestrian-friendly manner first starts with our policy documents, and those are Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, which is our long-range land use plan, and the Transportation System Plan, which is an element of the comp plan. Then zoning is used to implement these policies. So for instance, areas are zoned to indicate where a greater mix of uses should develop, such as zoning in downtown. And then at a finer grain level, zoning development standards, also called land use regulations, are used to require development in certain areas like downtown to build more compactly and result in more capacity for housing and jobs, as well as designed in a way to create more pedestrian access and amenities. So the state rules that we'll be talking about tonight will require changes to our long-range plans, maybe to zones and also to development standards to achieve the emissions reductions and equity goals. So if this is all sounding somewhat familiar, that's because the city has been moving in this direction for years. However, I'll note not with the same deadlines or the specific provisions that are now required in these new rules. In fact, I think it's pretty important to acknowledge that these new rules will be a huge lift for the community and for city staff, boards, and commissions. They are a lot to digest. They will be felt citywide, and they're an unplanned multi-year work effort that we're currently figuring out how to fit that in amongst a lot of other big projects that are already in progress. That said, as shown on this slide, Eugene has a history of working towards climate resiliency, compact development, compact walkable development, housing affordability and equity. And some of those efforts include the Climate Recovery Ordinance with a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on average by 7.6% every year. The 2035 Transportation System Plan and the Envision Eugene strategies for 20-minute neighborhoods where residents can meet most daily needs without having to drive. And most recently, the Middle Housing Code Amendments Project, that outreach for that project aimed to meaningfully engage and get input from historically marginalized populations. So there is an opportunity to look at how we can leverage these existing efforts when we are going forward and implementing these new requirements. So now, the next several slides will actually touch on each main component of the rules and at a high level what is required for implementation, starting with the items that have the soonest deadlines and then working our way to the ones that have the latest. And then we'll come back with a summary of deadlines at the end of the presentation. And I'll just say that this presentation is an overview. It doesn't include staff recommendations or significant detail that will be provided in the future on specific topic areas. So we'll just start with parking. So the rules with the most immediate implementation deadline relate to off-street parking requirements. Some changes which reduce or eliminate parking minimums for some uses in some areas will go into effect December 31 of this year without us even amending Eugene's code. Parking mandates to eliminate minimum off-street parking requirements must be adopted into Eugene's land use code and be effective by June 30th, 2023, unless otherwise extended. We'll talk more about that later. DLCD indicates that the rules are designed in a way to improve how parking areas are developed to decrease heat island effects, increase walkability, and promote compact development. So that's another part of the rules. The rules also require simplifying redevelopment of parking lots and shared parking and adding additional requirements to larger parking lots that are over a quarter-acre in size, requiring them to have solar panels, canopy trees, and pedestrians. The rules also add a cap on the amount of off-street parking that can be provided for some uses and in specific areas. Eugene currently has parking maximums, that's what those caps are called, for non-residential uses. But our current maximums will have to be addressed to ensure compatibility with these new state rules. And we will also have to add parking maximums for multi-unit development with 5 or more dwellings. And then the last bullet there, additional requirements related to reporting on parking and parking design will go into effect once Eugene's population exceeds 200,000. So the second part of parking, the rules also require cities to overall reduce parking mandates, which are the minimum number of off-street parking spaces that are required for new developments and for changes of use. So there are essentially 2 paths for doing this. And then depending on which path is chosen, there are additional requirements for complying with the rules. So the first path or option is on the left on the slide there, and that's simply to eliminate parking, off-street parking minimums citywide. This is the most equitable option because it applies citywide, and DLCD considers it the best management practice for parking policy. This does not mean that there will be no parking built. Parking will instead be driven by market demand and lending requirements, without the city dictating how much on a minimum is required. The second path is on the right. It's more of a multifaceted approach that has additional options for compliance. And some of those are listed on the slide, including we would have to amend our code to add parking space credits, require multi-unit developments to unbundle parking costs from the housing costs, limit or eliminate parking minimums for more uses and in certain areas, add more price on-street parking spaces, and there's more. So this slide is not comprehensive, but it just shows the complexity of this option, and that it's not just about the land use code, it actually touches other areas of parking regulation and implementation. So regardless of which of these 2 options is chosen, the state's intent is to have cities eliminate off-street parking minimums as much as possible. The interesting thing about the second option, which is something we are studying, is that it may only be applicable to a very small portion of Eugene because the rules already require eliminating parking minimums within a half mile of frequent transit corridors. And those are corridors with bus service with a scheduled frequency of at least 4 times an hour during peak service. And so that's actually a pretty big part of the city. So electric vehicle charging, in addition, the state has adopted a goal that 90% of new vehicles sold annually are electric vehicles or EVs by 2035. To promote the use of electric vehicles and the infrastructure they need, the new rules require some new developments to provide charging capacity for a portion of their parking. And that is by providing conduit only, not an actual charging facility. So that's a key distinction. As of July 2022, so this summer, the building code now has already been amended to require charging capacity be provided for at least 20% of parking spaces in new multi-unit buildings of 5 or more dwellings and new commercial buildings. So that's already required. Climate-friendly rules increase that to 40% of parking spaces for multi-unit buildings of 5 or more dwellings. Commercial only buildings stay at 20%. So this increase in the required amount of parking to be, to have charging conduit goes into effect March 31st, 2023, so next March, even without amending Eugene's land use code, but we anticipate adopting it locally so that developers are aware of this requirement as early as possible in their process. So climate-friendly areas, you'll be hearing more about this. The new rules aim to reduce dependency on single occupant vehicles by requiring cities to designate and zone for what the rules call climate-friendly areas. And these are urban mixed-use areas that have or are planned to have a greater mix and supply of housing, jobs, businesses, and services, and have high quality walking, biking, and transit infrastructure. Climate-friendly areas are similar to other local planning concepts like nodal or mixed-use development, Envision Eugene's key transportation corridors and core commercial areas strategy, and the 20-minute neighborhood concept I mentioned earlier. The first step for climate-friendly areas is for Eugene to develop a study of potential locations. So that's potential, not necessarily going to happen. And so those are just areas to study. Analysis must show that analysis must show that there is enough theoretical capacity in one or more climate-friendly areas to accommodate at least 30% of Eugene's existing and future housing needs. So for example, downtown, once we do that analysis, may be the only area that is needed to meet this target, or we may have to or want to identify additional areas. Climate-friendly areas must also meet criteria like allowing a mix of uses, have no minimum housing density, have no maximum housing density, have a minimum housing density. There are building height provisions, minimum area dimensions, and criteria around services. Vehicle parking in climate-friendly areas, just like the citywide options I talked about, there are two paths, either to eliminate required off-street parking minimums in climate-friendly areas and within a quarter mile of those, or do a multifaceted approach, which again includes reducing some of the required off-street parking minimums, looking at beefing up your on-street parking programs and other tools. The climate-friendly area analysis will be both technical, as I just outlined, but will also be qualitative. The work must include an engagement plan and an equity analysis, which we'll talk more about later, that engages underserved communities and identifies potential impacts to those communities from climate-friendly area planning, such as displacement issues. Eugene is required to adopt one or more climate-friendly area into our long-range plans and also adopt any necessary land use regulations in order to enable and really require that intended mix of uses to get the housing capacity and to create walkability consistent with the minimum standards in the rules. In the future, urban growth boundary planning must also incorporate any adopted climate-friendly areas. So we have to continue to demonstrate that enough climate-friendly areas are zoned in Eugene to accommodate a rolling 30% of Eugene's housing needs as we grow. So we're always meeting up at least 30% of our need in climate-friendly areas. If an urban growth boundary expansion is warranted through that analysis, through our urban growth boundary analysis, additional climate-friendly areas may also need to be designated. Rob?
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
Just sort of a break. Scenario planning is another component of the new rules, and they require jurisdictions within a metro area to engage in what's called scenario planning, which is a process for considering alternative plausible futures to see how different choices might affect different outcomes, sort of different ways of achieving the same goal. And in this case, the rules require cities and counties to develop and ultimately adopt a preferred scenario plan of future land use patterns and transportation facilities, and also policies and investments that together will reduce greenhouse gas pollution from light vehicles while also reducing inequities from past transportation and land use decisions. However, in 2015, our metro area developed a voluntary scenario plan in response to legislation at that time. And that scenario planning was similarly aimed at how the region could reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions as the region grows. And the new rules allow our metro area to use the 2015 scenario as a foundation while also engaging underserved communities and demonstrating how the preferred scenario improves equitable outcomes for these communities. So basically in 2015, we were required to develop a scenario that met state GHG goals, and our elected officials and policymakers were required to select that's a scenario, but they were not required to adopt it. What they're saying now is you can go back, and it was very much like a policy driven scenario, like how many miles of bikeways or how much revenue service of how much LTD service. It wasn't really heavy on like the land use side, like where is density going to go? But as you can see, the climate friendly area piece here is really taking care of that. That it must be adopted into our comprehensive and transportation plan. So the scenario that's selected has to be adopted into both our land use and our transportation plan, as well as any necessary policy or land use code changes that come out of that have to be adopted into the city code. And then after adoption of the scenario plan, future amendments to land use or transportation plans or to the land use code must be consistent with the adopted scenario. So mostly it'll be us working with the city of Springfield, but I think the city of Coburg and LTD may play a role in it as well. The rules also require revisions to our land use regulations that govern how buildings and development are designed in order to create an environment that is more conducive to walking, biking, and public transportation. So citywide land use regulations must create a connected transportation network for walking and biking, such as by things like maximum block lengths, and to make sure that auto-oriented uses like parking lots are compatible with pedestrians. Like, so some things like you see in newer developments, there's like walkways through the parking lots. If you go to an older shopping center, it's like, how do I get there from the street? So like continuing to do more and better of those kinds of things. In mixed use and commercial districts, regulations must include pedestrian access and circulation, access for people experiencing mobility disabilities, development oriented towards transit, and other provisions. Residential neighborhoods must have regulations that allow for slow neighborhood streets such as through building setbacks and building orientation. We must also allow development of low car districts where walking is the primary travel mode. And finally, land use regulations must protect current and future transportation facilities, such as through driveway spacing and more notifications to state transportation agencies for certain types of land use applications. Next. The rules will also require updating Eugene's long-range transportation plan, which is known as the Eugene 2035 Transportation System Plan, to be updated with policies and strategies for a connected biking, walking, and transit network, and the facilities needed to support and encourage more trips by these modes. Our current transportation system plan, our TSP, was adopted in 2017, and this process is going to require us to adopt a new TSP by 2026. So it's actually about 10 years, which is a good amount of time where we'll be kind of ready for an update to that. And we really try to have an emphasis on these kinds of things in the TSP we have now, but this is really asking us to do more and a better job of it. Updating the TSP will include the preferred scenario plan discussed earlier, there'll be a lot of other requirements to be considered as new requirements to take into account when we update our TSP. It also needs to integrate the climate friendly areas. We're also going to have to identify projects that will support non-auto trips and really use the ability of projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as really a major component of it, how we select what projects to include in the TSP and what projects to prioritize. We will also have to update the criteria used for measuring traffic impacts from developments, which are called transportation performance measures, and possibly adding one or more criteria to that. So right now you may have heard of what are called level of service standards. Historically, the way we communities in America look at development as like how many auto trips will generate and can accommodate that on our system. And what the state is saying is you need to look at more than just that. The next slide, please. The rules also include new bicycle parking standards to further support making communities more bike friendly and reducing vehicle trips. And so these will, we had already actually planned an update to our bicycle parking code. So this will just be an opportunity to do that and to use the, to add, we kind of had an update ready to go, but we'll look at what the state's requiring and make sure that we're complying with that and all current best practices. The new rules require bike parking spaces to be provided in certain locations. And when vehicle parking is required, bicycle parking is required at twice the amount of the vehicle parking. Of course, if we get rid of vehicle parking requirements, that doesn't mean we won't require bike parking. It just means we'll have the city council have discretion, like what are we going to set it at? What's the new policy going to be? And then enter the code. Other bicycle parking standards include things like security, maneuverability, and accommodating large bicycles such as family and cargo bikes. Another thing we'll probably want to look at is electric bikes, because that's becoming a bigger part of our solution to encouraging people to drive less. Heather.
Thanks, Rob. So engagement and equity. So aiming to rectify harms done in the past and in current practices related to transportation, land use, and climate change. As previously mentioned, the new rules are geared towards centering the voices of the most vulnerable populations in Oregon during these land use and transportation planning efforts. And so equitable engagement must ensure that underserved populations in our community are informed about the choices, given the opportunity for input, and given an equitable share of the decision-making power as possible. The rules also require an equity analysis in certain situations. So like the climate friendly area study is one of those situations. To help identify the impacts of proposed projects and policies and to identify potentially inequitable consequences or burdens that might occur on impacted communities from those potential projects and policies. So as an example, an equity analysis would require determining where current and past land use, transportation, housing policies, and the effects of climate change have harmed or is likely to harm underserved populations. So that's just one component of the equity analysis. And if you do find that there is an instance of that, what are the mitigation strategies that are necessary to help alleviate that? And how can the desired outcomes be measured and monitored? And reporting. The city will be required to regularly report on progress in complying with the rules and in meeting the emissions reduction targets and equitable outcome goals, and propose corrective actions if we are off target. So finally, next steps. So to recap, here are the main components to be adopted generally in the order of when they're due. The rules do allow jurisdictions to request an alternative deadline for some, but not all of the components, and there's certain criteria that have to be met. So staff will be looking at that option as we scope out each of the components, but these are the deadlines that are in the rules. However, we also recognize that some of these deadlines are really soon, and so we may have to move forward assuming the deadlines are as they are reflected in the rules while waiting for any alternative deadline to be approved. So the next steps, the true next steps for implementing the rules is this will be a multi-year effort. So just starting with the first two bullets, as I mentioned earlier, reducing parking requirements for some uses and near frequent transit corridors. And then the requirement to provide electrical vehicle conduit, those will go into effect with those dates that are on the slide without Eugene adopting anything, even though we will eventually put those in our code. The majority of the parking rules, however, with those two options about off-street parking, must be in effect by June 30 of 2023, unless an alternative date is otherwise approved. Per council direction, we have requested a deadline extension to do additional public outreach. And the dates on this slide assume we got that extension. And so staff leading the parking rules anticipate coming back to this group next month to discuss the parking rules in more detail. So you can see that on the slide sometime in December. And then as far as the rest of the components that we outlined, we are continuing to scope the implications and costs of the different components. As I mentioned, we were already mid-stride in a bunch of other big projects. And so it's taking some time to figure out what each of the components mean and need and who's on first base to do them and that sort of thing. The climate friendly rules implementation effort did receive some funding for this budget year from council. Thank you, council, and from the state. Thank you, state. So that will help us at least get started on some of these efforts. So this slide has two links. DLCD's webpage has a bunch of information to help support communities in their implementation. The city just got up a pretty basic climate friendly rules webpage just to actually point people to DLCD and to help start getting the word out, like this meeting hopefully will as well. We know this was a fire hose of information. The rules are pretty complex and they've actually changed a lot over the rulemaking process. So, you know, of course, we're happy to take your questions, but forewarning, we may not be able to answer all of them yet. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Go ahead and jump in with questions. Art.
I just have three comments, I suppose. I was on the planning commission 25 years ago when we did the first growth management study. The big thing that came out of that, as you mentioned, was nodal development. Transportation corridor, we identified about 12 nodal development areas that could be addressed and looked at. I think the only successful one has been Chase Village in the area around Chase. That worked out really well. Others were tried and planned a bit for. More recently, say several years ago, there was the effort to deal with South Willamette and the parking lot and everything there. The landowners were really successful in trashing that process. You know, the whole idea, you can imagine a community on the parking lot of 29th and Willamette with 4 or 5 story buildings, you know, commercial down below, housing 15, 20,000 people. Who knows how many people you could house there, you know, but it couldn't happen. So I think the rules are funny. And I think it's funny that the state says the cities must make this happen. It's the people that make it happen and people have to make choices. So one thing about, I've always been curious about the bike usage, and it's amazing, you know, we've had major efforts within a transportation system plan to increase biking, increase bike paths, increase the bike parking. And here's LCOG always tracks the number of things. And this is 9 years. This is 2021. Well, we were doing much better in 2013, 2014. I think it was because my generation was still young and we're riding a lot of bikes, because there was a generation that rode a lot of bikes and did things. We're just cruising along with no change, even though we built bike paths and improved the bike path and things like that. So unless you're gonna, e-bikes have a potential. So maybe we can increase that. And if the city would pass some funding so that we could give everybody $1,000 to buy an e-bike, you know, but you have to do something to make people make these choices. You just can't say the transportation plan, don't tell me you're going to add bike paths to some more streets and things like that and bike parking. I mean, it's all good, but I mean, 10 years from now, we'll be looking and saying, why didn't Eugene do something? Well, we did something, but people are still doing what they wanted to do. Maybe the parking will help, but I mean, this is just a really hard slog to go. And I had a third comment, but I think that's enough. But I really think that I think all this is good and we need to do that planning and things, but unless the city gets serious about trying to find some funding, and it's essentially redistribution of funds, because there's people that can afford to pay some more taxes, and therefore we can get more people be able to afford to do the things we need to do to address climate change. And so I don't think just planning and adding these rules is funny. States, well, it's all good intention, but we can see our history is it's a tough slog just based on a few rules.
Quick response. First of all, yes, I totally agree with you. And in terms of the incentives, eWeb does have a $300 rebate right now that's up to 2 per household for buying and purchasing an e-bike or retrofitting a bike.
It's great.
So, and that's been very popular. So we're hoping for more of that.
And I guess it was the electric vehicles as well. That's the other thing that's happening. I had leased an electric vehicle for 3 years, trying to buy one now. You wait 6 months at most. I mean, so the market is there and people are really wanting to buy electric vehicles. So you put up some more charging stations, but you have to wait 6 months. And the dealers are enjoying this because they say, okay, we're going to add $5,000 to $10,000 on top of the MSRP. Can you imagine? We used to never pay, because we can get it and people want to have it. And they're taking the tax break and everything for the dealer. And they don't do anything because they just get the car in immediately, it's gone. So it's a tough world right now for EVs. So again, we can do this, we can make it more easy to get charging and things like that, but there's a whole system around us that's going to make it hard for the best concerned city that we are to realize these goals. But let's keep going. I mean, I'm all in favor of all you're saying, but just reality is going to make it tough.
Chris?
Just lots of thoughts. One of them is just a question about what are your thoughts on when we talked about nodal development, conduits and the upgrading, how are we going to mitigate the increased cost of housing that could be created by these beneficial improvements and policy changes? And if that does happen, which I think if we look at the cost of real estate in Eugene, it's a high probability. How does this impact our underserved and discriminated communities that we want to be a part of this very change that we're working towards?
Yeah, there were a lot of comments during the rulemaking about those very issues. Concern that, and I think the EV conduit charging is a good example of concern that will increase the cost of development. And so how do you offset that? So I'm not sure that I know I don't have a good answer for it, but one of the things I can say about the climate friendly area study is that we are, part of the analysis is looking at fair housing, is looking at displacement, gentrification, displacement issues. So actually looking across the community and using both quantitative and qualitative data to figure out where you've already seen gentrification, or there's what level of gentrification different parts of the city are in, and whether or not designating it a climate friendly area, including the investment that would go in there, would increase displacement issues. And I think that can be pretty broadly thought about, and what impact that would have to underrepresented populations, and then coming up with mitigation strategies. And so the state has done a lot of work to try to identify what types of strategies are most effective depending on what type of level of gentrification is happening in an area, working with professionals in that arena. And so we will be looking into those issues for sure with climate friendly areas. But I think the other questions you raise on a broader level, I think are things that are going to come up as we're doing this work.
And one concern I have is about this process is it's going to make us focus on these climate friendly areas where on new construction, and new construction costs more to live in, right? So this will create opportunities that maybe, we're going to be creating more housing in our community, and that'll mean other buildings maybe will become less expensive or more affordable. And I want to make sure that all of our communities walkable and bikeable, and has people have access to EVs. And so like all these already constructed apartment complexes and buildings all around Eugene, they're not going to be required to have any EV charging. And so we're talking about, are there places where we can put EV charging on the street? How can we create incentives for existing developments, especially in more moderate income areas, to add EV charging? Try to collaborate with building owners, because there are going to be some programs available. And one thing to keep in mind too is there's sort of the transportation and housing costs together, those add up. And so once you have an EV, you're paying a lot less on your transportation cost than if you're, than if you have a gas powered vehicle. So the question is like, how can we help people afford to get those EVs and not have to pay the extra $5,000?
eventually.
No, I appreciate it. It's hard, 'cause it's, if things go well, you could bump into the old supply and demand curve, right? So more people recognize I want to be in that type of a community. Supply is limited, costs go up, and then the very people that we're trying to help are priced out, so.
Right, like in America, walkable communities are often most expensive because they're so desirable and there's not enough of them.
Right.
But then, so like, are there existing neighborhoods in Eugene that we can make more walkable? So for example, like, you have Professor Nico Largo years ago did this study. There's this apartment complex on Royal Avenue next to Albertsons and Weimar. He found there was like a ton of walking going back and forth there. And yeah, that may not be people's vision of a walkable neighborhood with cafes and all that, but still people are meeting a lot of their basic needs between this apartment development and Weimar and the supermarket. And that's important. And then since then, the city's also added an affordable housing development called Prairie View, right south of there. And just now we're about to add a safe pedestrian crossing to a manufactured home development across the street. So it's about like, how do we create that neighborhood where those connections are there that people can, meet their daily needs. And I think supermarkets are such a big part of that because that's something, that we all need food, right? So.
And it doesn't need to be designated a climate friendly
Right,
area to
exactly.
make that happen. That's the other part of this, is that there's the state requirements, and then there's, like we were talking about, there's our 20-minute neighborhood concept that's already in some of our plans, and just in general, making things more walkable and transit friendly, so.
I wanted to check in with Laura. Do you have any specific questions in the moment? Okay. I will go and then we'll turn it back to folks. Specifically, I had a question around that removal of parking minimums half a mile from transit corridors. And there's specifically one corridor in Eugene where significant amount of the property at the outside of the corridor is not actually in the city, and that's River Road. And so there's already a very difficult lift for the parking services to enforce priced parking, as you were talking about. How, in your initial thinking about the development of this project, will areas like that be met? Because of course there's a transit corridor overlay where it has to be maintained with the transit. There's also the walkability, and then there's the fact that so many that overflow into residential neighborhoods when there are no parking minimums creates a huge havoc, especially for streets that are not even meeting street standards.
Yeah, that, and we definitely submitted those comments during the rulemaking process quite a few times. The parking rules folks, so that would be Lydia Bishop and Reed Werner, will be coming back to you all in December. And so I would just defer parking questions to them, but we can give them a heads up that that's gonna be part of the conversation. And I apologize for the cough drop. I just knew that water wasn't doing it, so I'm sorry.
Not at all. And I have one more question. I'll just turn it over. I was really grateful that you brought up manufactured home communities, because that is a huge affordable housing, but often in very far away places with very little to no transit access. And I'm curious in this planning or thinking if those communities that exist now, I'm thinking West Eugene and other parts of Eugene, how can this project sort of benefit those communities that are existing housing stock, or are we only focusing on new development?
Well, I think, I mean, you were talking about that a little bit with wanting to make sure that we spread infrastructure investments throughout the community and not just focusing on climate friendly areas.
Right.
And then I think there's climate friendly areas, and that's a specific thing that we have to meet for this state. But that doesn't mean we can't do additional planning. And in fact, we have done some of that already around 20-minute neighborhoods in our key transit corridors and core commercial areas. So we just need to continue to keep doing that analysis, I think, throughout the city. And, using, I guess the way I think of it is climate friendly areas is probably going to be a subset of our overall planning around the city.
We have done specific projects around the city to benefit people that live in manufactured home. Like We built like a kind of a side path on Division Avenue, for example, by Lee's Mobile Home Park, that where those people couldn't walk to the commercial area. It's not great what we built, but I think it's a big improvement over how it was before, just as an example.
Okay, thanks. I'll let my folks go, Jan.
Well, I'm kind of confused about, I thought when you, in the presentation, you said we needed to designate enough climate friendly areas to show that we were going to meet the goals, whatever. Their goal was supposed to meet.
30% of our housing need, yep.
So, and then you said a minute ago, we don't need all these improvements that we want to make don't have to be designated.
The transportation system plan, in other words, like not all of our projects have to benefit climate friendly areas. And just to be clear, like, I just want to make sure people understand, like, and I make sure I'm understanding this right, like 30%, not of our new development, but 30% of all of our development, all of our housing, 30% has to be accommodated in climate friendly areas, right?
Yep,
So that's our plan, has to show how we're going to get there.
yep.
And my other was just a minor comment and probably come up more when we talk to the parking people, and just the wondering about the relationship between the reduction in parking and the promotion of electric vehicles. I mean, will we anticipate that we'll have more vehicles overall, or just that everybody's being replaced with electric vehicles?
Just keep in mind, like, we're not saying developers aren't allowed to build parking, we're just saying we're not going to require them to, so.
And we see that already downtown, right? I mean, we are seeing parking being provided downtown, and there is no minimum parking requirement downtown. So we already see that's an example of an area where there's no minimum requirement, and development is providing parking based on what they think the market would demand, or what lending prices, lending institutions would require for that kind of development. So that's just an example. Oh, that covered a whole bunch.
Yeah.
I got like 2 seconds.
No, go ahead.
Thank you so much for all your work and for this really interesting presentation. And, you know, just to get back to what Art was saying, you can make all the system changes in the world, but one of the things that we're dealing with, especially in this country, is this convenient car culture. We're not to the level of like New York or New Jersey or something like that, where it's just so freaking complicated to do anything. And I see people, my family lives back east, and I was just back there, and people commute 2 hours a day, and they take the train in from New Jersey. And I went to go into New York one day, and the parking lot was full. So we had to drive into New York, you know. I guess that my question is that this is all good and well, but how are you going to affect culture shift? And it's embedded. And one of the things that I was just thinking of as I was listening to you was like New Belgium Brewery in Colorado gives employees an incentive to not drive their car. And there's also alternatives to do that. The U of O has worked with LTD and does the bus pass thing. And, you know, one of the things I heard, especially during this whole Claire Surratt thing about River Road, is that, you know, people are not, I can see why they were scared of having the MX there, but I think that there's a real gap in communication and public-private partnership and implementing stuff like this. It's like, what can we do as a city to create that change that we want to see, where we're investing all this stuff in all the infrastructure? So just some food for thought, or a question or a comment, you know, it's just, I think it's multi-leveled. I think that besides citizen engagement, like I said, I think the real place is, you know, home and school. Is how do we create these public-private partnerships to create these incentives so that people are able to engage in this type of thing, and not have like, you know, takes me 20 minutes to drive to work, bus takes an hour and a half, you know. It's like there needs to be this fundamental shift, and also consideration for the fact that, you know, we live here because we don't want to commute 2 hours each way to and from work. And so anyway, I can go on, but you get my point.
Well, I mean, briefly, because this, I mean, we can have like a whole retreat on that topic, but we are trying to work on those things where they kind of got put on hiatus for some different reasons, but we started developing regulations called transportation demand management that would apply to multifamily housing and employers in Eugene and require some of the things you're talking about. The state is in the process of developing regulations for employers that would take effect on employers of 100 or more employees starting in 2025. And I've managed a team of 10 people, and at least 3 of us just work on what we call transportation options. So if you'd all like, we could come back and talk about that and make it a future
I don't think we
agenda.
have time,
Because I don't think there's time today.
we're watching.
Yeah, anyway, but I'd love to get your input on that. But yeah, it's totally true. It's hard to change people's behavior. And so it's like, carrots and sticks, creating infrastructure, but that alone doesn't do it. So, yeah.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
No, I mean, leaving it to the market is not gonna work, and that's what we're just saying, and that's what you're saying. Well, they don't require parking, but clearly the people downtown that have development are gonna put in parking places because people want them and they want them to come. So that isn't quite it. One suggestion, as you said, we don't just want to focus on the high development areas in the corridors. But why don't we allow every multifamily development to have a store there to provide people like the neighborhood stores that we used to have? I mean, that's what's been lost. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to walk to a market. You don't need a big market daily, but you need a market nearby. So that's one way to distribute that. I mean, there's a little market in a neighborhood in the South Hills, people will walk. But otherwise, they're not walking.
Yeah, just part of it, Art got part of what I was talking about. I call it like back to the future. I mean, there are lots of neighborhoods. I mean, I live in Laurel Hill Valley where there used to be a neighborhood school and a neighborhood little market. Neither exists. That it's something else that's happening at the school buildings. And so I think collaborative planning with school district is an important part of this. And are there carrots for markets within walkable distance of schools? As one of the things that could create or recreate those kinds of walkable neighborhoods. I just think of 24th and Agate, where the little neighborhood market became a video store for a while, and now it's gone. And it used to be a walkable market for that neighborhood. And now you got to go further down to 24th and Hilliard, and it's getting to be a longer schlep. So, in that sense of carrot and sticks, are there ways to incentivize reinvestment in those community hubs that existed before? And I think the collaboration with the school district is an important part, because we're trying to get walkable schools, but what if the parents don't have to walk to the market either?
Population is aged in place, and so we don't need as many. I said our population is aged in place, and so we don't need as many schools, right?
No, I know, and I know the whole, South Eugene affordability issues are about that and starting to trend the other way now. We've been there before in more walkable neighborhoods, as Art was mentioning as well. And it's carrots and sticks.
This is a big snarly topic, and I don't envy the layers that you all have to go through. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your questions. We'll be back. Great.
Shut down your.
Exactly. How's it going? Good. Are you up there? Busy, right? Very busy. We're reading.
Airbnb is second floor.
Yeah, I just got out of South Hill neighborhood out here. No, not ABC. That's over Zoom.
So maybe we were right on time. So well done, everyone. At this moment,
Good.
we were being asked to pivot to a new topic. Does anybody need a quick break? But a couple minutes break, just to like be reasonable. We're gonna go a little long tonight. Okay. Can we take like 3 minutes? Anybody just eat a
Yeah, you stop walking by and they compliment my house.
It's going late into the evening.
Nice job, Ian.
We'll talk more.
Station outside.
Yeah, I've been going to meetings with Heather virtually because I'm the liaison for this station.
Dinner.
Okay.
Sure. We have one
Solution.
in between.
You guys have a break.
Uh,
I just want to say, I really appreciate your
Yeah.
Well, the evaluation.
Well, the cost in 3 years,
Laura, can you hear me?
the amount of the cost to rebuild your home is almost doubled
Somebody has to.
in the last 3 years. That's what's insane.
Right.
It's like a
We were
1965.
meant to do the letter of support.
I got temporary occupancy in my house.
$200,000 for rebuild that 3 years ago. Now we're at
I
450.
don't know where to shout.
Oh, I looked.
Which direction do I shout?
And I knew, you know, I built a house and occupancy.
We need a minute of quiet.
And I've looked at costs. since
Sorry,
then.
corner, can I ask for a quick second?
I got down to.
Laura, Zach has to leave by 7:05. Would it be okay if I led the conversation on the draft letter of support? So he can do his presentation now?
Yep, definitely. And could you just encourage people to come as individuals, as many as possible?
To the
Yeah,
hearing,
Public
yes.
Yeah.
Sure can.
thank you.
Thank you.
You didn't bring a dog either.
No, that was on the agenda. Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started again. Thanks, everybody. We're gonna do a quick impromptu agenda switch. So folks can get to their next scheduled appointments. So we'd like to present Zach Mulholland, just giving us a short presentation on the public health overlay zone on behalf of Beyond Toxics. It's a topic of discussion that's been brought to city council at least once. Is that true, Councilor Temple? Yes. And has that been a work session?
We had a work session. Come on, Zach, what did we decide to do?
Where are we?
Council had an initial work session where they got a briefing from staff on sort of the broad set of policies that were available. And right now, as council brought a number of questions back to staff that believe that they're trying to figure out how to scope that work and set timelines for it. And bring back a number of options for council.
Okay.
Positive momentum, council.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do this, find out how. Come back.
So we're ready to learn more.
Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. My name is Zach Mulholland, here with Beyond Toxics this evening, here to talk about public health overlay zones, which is a land use code change rule update in order to protect public health in Eugene. As many of you are aware of, the city's had major issues in West Eugene with pollution of over 95% of the particulate matter is emitted from large stationary sources in West Eugene. There are lower life expectancies in the 97402 area code compared to other parts of Eugene. And the poster child for this was the J.H. Baxter site, where community members complained for decades, and unfortunately their concerns were largely unheeded by LRAPA and local regulatory bodies. Until earlier this year, there was dioxins were found on the J.H. Baxter site, as well as a number of neighboring property sites. So for context, the EPA says that dioxin levels higher than 4 parts per trillion are health concern. There were sites there with well over 150 parts per trillion. So, you know, it was many times the safe limit. That being said, sort of the reason for a public health overlay zone is that we have high levels of pollution in West Eugene. So the map that's shown above, and I have a couple copies that I can pass around here as well. The map here is a map of the large stationary sources of emissions that the DEQ has put together. And so this is the list of the 43 most toxic facilities in Eugene. As you can see, there is concentrations of those facilities along Highway 99, along the railroad tracks there, as well as along Roosevelt Avenue, along the railroad tracks heading out in West Eugene. So these are sort of the core areas of concern for individuals facing cumulative health impacts from those facilities. Pass these maps around. This is a poverty by zip code, and then the second map there is excuse me, communities of color by zip code. And there happens to be a lot of overlap between where the large stationary sources of emissions are on the cumulative health impacts and where communities of color and low-income communities are located. Talk a little bit about the Clear Lake overlay zone. Back all the way. One more. So this is a map of the Clear Lake overlay zone. So out in the northwest, at the end of Highway 99, if you know where Jerry's is, this is just to the northwest of that, sort of between Jerry's and the airport. And a number of years ago, I believe it was 2016, when the city was getting ready to expand its urban growth boundary for additional industrial properties. A number of rules were put in place in that area to ensure that the development wasn't going to have negative impacts on the nearby communities. So there's a number of banned land uses in this area, including wood preservation like J.H. Baxter, as well as chemical production, and a number of other facilities that was thought would have either be a nuisance or have a high potential impact on the community. And then everything that is south of Clear Lake Road, so everything that's marked in E1 there, they also have what's referred to as the enclosure requirement that says that everything in those areas has to be done indoors. So you don't have outdoor production with outdoor air emissions. For everything that's closest to the neighborhoods and to the parkland that's going to be a large sports center in the future. Everywhere in that site, there are increased setback standards, higher odor and noise standards. There's a requirement for a public meeting whenever there's a large industrial project for giving the community an opportunity to weigh in. And then everything south of Clear Lake Road has this indoor manufacturing requirement. So in terms of where would a Clear Lake overlay zone apply, the priority areas that we've been pushing are those industrial corridors in West Eugene. I think what we've heard from counselors is they really would like this to apply to all of the industrial areas in Eugene, in addition to those that are facing the most direct cumulative impacts out in West Eugene. And then in terms of how it would work in practice, so this is the J.H. Baxter site, and this is essentially meant to show where the plume of emissions is going. And then in the future, the hope would be that everywhere within this site, you would have these increased standards from the Clear Lake overlay zone that we would apply more broadly throughout the city. So we would take that banned uses list, we would take the higher odor and noise standards and setback standards and apply them within the industrial area. And then in the blue crosshatched area that is within a quarter mile of homes and schools, that we would also have that indoor manufacturing requirement, so that everywhere we're banning the worst uses and having slightly higher standards, but then closest to homes and schools, everything would have to be done indoors. When industrial activities are done in commercial areas in Eugene right now, they have a very similar standard that has to be done indoors. And that standard in commercial areas is even stronger because they say that there can't be outdoor external air emissions that require an air quality permit. So essentially saying it has to be done indoors and you can't have external air pollution. So that would be sort of the ideal within a quarter mile of homes and schools. The next two maps is sort of looking at sort of other issues that were risen out of this process. The first is that there's probably some opportunities to actually rezone some undeveloped lands to reduce potential conflicts. So there was recently a big apartment complex put in at 18th and Willow, right across the street from a number of industrial zones. And there's additional agricultural land marked in yellow just to the south and east of those industrial lands that are also designated to become residential zoned in the future. So I think to point out that there might be an opportunity for the city to get out ahead of some of that development and rezone a strip of property between the residential and industrial lands there to create something of a buffer between those two land uses. And then the last map here is kind of looking out into the future. If and when the city expands its UGB, we should create rules now that make it so that we'll never zone residential lands next to industrial lands in the future, just to get out ahead of it so that's not an issue when that happens. I know that there's a lot of talk about putting in a large deep sea port in Coos Bay. and expanding the rail line in through West Eugene, and there's potentially going to be a rail to truck facility located in this area. And so we want to make sure that we're not putting homes right next to any new industrial areas, as well as like right next to the railroads, because there's some issues with chemical releases from railroads that are also an issue for nearby homes and schools. So the ideal is that sort of as a third phase of this work is that we create rules to not zone residential next to industrial if and when the city expands. Send you a sign-on letter to the Sustainability Commission yesterday that I hope you've seen, where the active Bethel Community Neighborhood Association has signed on in support of public health overlay zone. The South Hills Neighborhood Association just signed on as well, and we would love the Sustainability Commission support. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you. That was really thorough and really fascinating information. My question is that, you know, we get requests like this periodically, and this is something that the city is working on now. So how do we go about determining, and is it something that we can do is sign on to letters? Is it one of our committees?
That's a good question. As acting chair, I don't know the answer. My understanding is that we could certainly send our own letter of support. I don't know if there are predetermined rules that would prevent us from signing on to somebody else's
Send a
letter.
letter. If the commission thinks that this is a good thing, the commission can write a letter to council and say so.
Sure.
By the way, did a great job on Monday night. And that, we're the only commission that had all the examples of everything you've actually done.
So many things. Chair Laura, do you have any insights onto signing on to an existing letter versus writing our own, and does it matter?
I don't know about signing on to an existing letter. I know we send our own letters often. So.
Well, and I have to follow up since my thing's still on, is where is this at right now? Is there something before the city council?
We're hoping to come back before council early next year. I believe the last work session was in September. And council asked for staff to bring a number of these ideas back, specifically calling for the things we were asking for, buffer zones and closure standards. I think that unfortunately the land use staff that would be working on this are also working on
Very busy.
climate friendly communities and the Santa Clara River Road neighborhood plan, as well as an upcoming Bethel neighborhood plan. And so they're trying to figure out how quickly they can get this work into the mix. I think everybody's hoping that this will be early next year, that they'll be able to fit this in.
So is it in a is it now on the list for a work session?
It's not on the agenda.
It's received its first work session. It's awaiting. We're trying to have them expedite the second work session.
But that will happen.
Yes.
It didn't die in
Oh, no.
the first one.
It's going.
Excellent.
I had a question specifically about the map of the goal of the public health overlay zone, the kind of the green bands. And if I were an industrial business owner, you know, my curiosity would be, of course, this is likely to restrict redevelopment. The sites that we're looking at that are high polluters would not be affected by a public health overlay zone because they're already in existence. Is that true? Or they would be asked to change their current practices in order to meet this public health overlay zone?
Generally, already existing properties are grandfathered in as a non-conforming existing use when land use changes like this are implemented. But if they were to expand their facility, then they would potentially come into these higher standards. And then LA County, for some of their subset standards, they said when those entities apply for a new permit, when their current permit expires and they have to reapply, that they can be brought up to that higher standard. So that's something where like an enclosure standard might kick in if and when they either expand or they're subject to new permits.
Okay.
But I think that's one of the details that'll have to get worked out.
Yeah, I would just worry, I guess, that an industrial facility that was kind of pointed out by this work might then prevent needed upgrades in order to not have to meet this standard, thereby actually worsening air quality in that immediate area for some period of time. And if there's anything that can be done to affect that, I appreciate, especially thinking about those buffer commercial zones, so upzoning residential, reducing our available residential stock, but creating a buffer. So there's something there. But you know, the existing large businesses in our community do have you know, lots of investment of funds into these existing infrastructure, and what would this actually look like in practice for those facilities? Murphy Plywood, for example, would that, you know, have they been consulted about any of this, or is this something that would happen to them and therefore they would react by, I don't know, would we lose jobs? Would they not upgrade their systems in order to not have to apply for a permit? I'm just curious about the practical.
Yeah, I think both Councilors Evans and Groves have both expressed a strong interest in working with the industrial community. Councilor Groves has done a lot of conversations with folks where, you know, as an industrial entity, they don't necessarily want residential development right next to them either, right? And so it's a two-way street that residences don't want industry by them, and industry doesn't want residences by them. And so hopefully there's you know, a win-win factor there. And in terms of, you know, this is really targeting mostly new and expanding development in order to not further exacerbate the high levels of pollution that are already in these areas. It's not designed to crack down on existing facilities. The other tools that are being developed around insurance requirements. So making sure that if these facilities shut down, that they can actually pay for cleanup. And then, you know, a further step in the future might be to look at potentially the city's nuisance rules, where people have complained about odors, but they sort of just got directed to another agency. And so those might need stronger teeth. But this policy is again really focused on stopping new and expanded harms.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and Zach, thanks for emphasizing that. And that's kind of what I wanted to address, because when I moved back to town and I started looking at the data about life expectancy, I sat down with Pablo Alvarez when he was working for Beyond Toxics and NAACP and went door to door in that neighborhood. And I had no idea that was part of my city. And the differences that exist within our community were, you know, heart-stopping for me. Just in terms of life expectancy differences of like 17 to 18 years. And so as I understand, the HOPE overlay says you can't do more than you've already done in the worst neighborhood in our county. I mean, is that what your sense, sort of an accurate summary of where we're at? You can't do more than you're doing already. Isn't that really what the zone would do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's trying to stop the worst potential land uses from locating in this area.
Because we've already got so much going on in that
To
area
mitigate impacts.
that's toxic.
I think as Councilor Ye eloquently said when there was the work session on this topic, is that we want to create a situation where no matter where you live in Eugene, you're not going to have disproportionate health impacts. Just because of where you live.
Disproportionate, exactly.
And hence why, yeah, we're focused on West Eugene where the biggest problem is, but these rules could be implemented citywide and protect everyone.
Okay, that's helpful. And then just, you know, a little bit of a follow-up in terms of the question of sign-on letter versus letter R's. Did you say you sent us the draft letter that's been signed on to by others?
Yeah, I sent that to the Sustainability Commission email through the form, the website.
Oh, that's right. You sent that before.
Yeah.
Okay, I can go back and find it.
Yesterday.
Apologies, I didn't bring a hard copy.
No, I can go back and find it.
But you know.
Now that
if you
clicking
wanted,
when you did that public comment.
Take that as a draft and tweak it or to write your own, I think, and you know, either would be super appreciated by you know, Beyond Toxics, but also the members of the community that are directly impacted by these issues.
So are you confident that, I mean, we have plenty of problems now with this without looking at the future development. And are you confident, or is there something going on now, just at least to ensure that the existing industrial polluters are following their permits, the Clean Air Act, all this other stuff? I mean, you said that with the Baxter stuff that El Rapa just ignored, that everything was fine. You know, so what's the status?
You know, things aren't as tight as, you know, we would like them to be. I think the Cleaner Air Oregon process is an improvement over previous processes, and that they are looking at cumulative harms of facilities, and they are you know, trying to look at these impacts and limit these impacts. But you know, they're starting at the very worst of the worst and working their way down, and it's gonna take some time. I guess the first point I would make.
Is it, on a side note, is it something that individually or whatever that we need to be talking to, like our senators or congress people, to bring that to light? Because I don't have the research in front of me, but it's my understanding that in the recent years, those things like Clean Air, Clean Water Act have gotten weakened.
He's actually talking about a state
Oh,
rule,
right.
Clean Air Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah, but probably. Jan?
I was just trying to hear what you were saying. So, but it sounds like we have a little bit of time on the letter issue. It's not currently scheduled.
Yeah, I believe
so-
this will come back early next year sometime, probably January, the earliest, unfortunately. And so, yeah, if you guys decide that you need to take a little time to either draft your
So
own
we
letter.
could look
or
at that
to-
letter,
that
those
would
of
be
us that
fine.
haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Could we have that be an agenda item next time?
Laura just said she wasn't able to open link you sent, so if you could email.
Yeah.
For the,
Yeah, we can bring forward that letter to.
Yeah.
As an agenda. item
Thanks.
next week. Yep, and if there are additional questions, definitely. Did you have something, Amber?
Yeah, I can just say my reaction is clearly, I'd be very comfortable saying, we definitely support the goal of this overlay clearly for Canada. And we urge city council to pursue it as aggressively as they could. But I think that as a sustainability commission, you know, we want to be an informed and reliable, you know, input source to the council. And I don't know enough. I mean, even understanding what you're saying, I get it, and I'm totally, I mean, I'm glad that they've already started the process, and I would urge them from the commission to continue that process, but I don't know if I want to say much more than that, at least today. We can look at it next month briefly and see, but I'm more in favor of a very brief letter that is very strong, but not necessarily very detailed, because I don't think, as a commission, at least at this point, I don't feel we're informed enough to give a very detailed comment.
Okay, thanks, Mary.
I think that that's actually a really good idea to say, yes, we like this. We're glad you're doing it. Please keep going. And then as it gets fleshed out a little bit and we all have more information, usually the Sustainability Commission, as you know, writes a strong letter in favor. But I don't see any harm, and it's, you know, we like some accolades to say, yes, thank you, keep going.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate Beyond Toxic's ongoing work on this issue. They've been working on in the West Eugene community for 20 years, I'm sure. And the success of the Clear Lake overlay zone shows a real precedent and a model that has worked and that has been approved. So it obviously has teeth and legs, should it be? The other, it is obviously also one piece of the puzzle. This alone will not solve this issue. And so I think encouraging council to also review some of the other air quality recommendations that the commission has brought to them, especially around fence line monitoring of polluters, enhanced coordination with El Rapa, communication with affected neighbors in these Cleaner Air Oregon sites. There's other parts where, you know, we can't ask Beyond Toxics to do all the work. And there are other things that impact people's health, you know, home heating, other things that exacerbate these toxics. So I think this is a really important piece of it, but it's not the only one for sure.
Great. Thank you all so much.
7:05, look at us go.
I believe in your packet along this longer policy description document, there's also some draft ordinance language that we've shared with staff. So if any of you want to dive in deep into the nitty gritty details of it, That's available in your packet. And just thank you so much for your time and for your interest, and I'm available to answer questions, and you should all have my email from the one I sent to the commission, and happy to answer any questions that come up in the next 1 month or beyond.
I just want to thank you for this write-up of it. It was so clear. It really, really helped, you know, as somebody who's already been through one work session and I read this before tonight. I just really appreciate the clarity and accessibility of what you gave us.
Well, thank you much.
Thank you, Zach.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thanks. See you this
Have a
evening.
great night.
Due to an error at home, I ended up printing an extra copy of the materials about this item, so if anybody needs that, I'm looking for a copy. That's helpful, thank you. Yep.
A process question and, you know, and how we proceed from here. And I think Art has the general notion that we do what I would call a conceptual letter at this point, and then perhaps take a closer look at it in January. That's just a process question. Do we want to look towards crafting a motion that says something goes forward now? With the thought that a work session might be drafted early January. Scheduled early January with council. So we are on record supporting the concept without having to get great specificity. And then looking at it some more in January and see if we might want to sign on to that existing letter or something like that. That's an open-ended question on the way to maybe us crafting the motion.
Appreciate it. I actually wanted to ask a follow-up process question, which is that in previous years or in some years, there is no December meeting due to the holidays. And so quick raise of hands, is there anybody who knows they're not going to be available to meet in December and therefore we would not have quorum?
Yeah, I saw we
It'd
weren't
actually be on the
scheduled.
21st.
No.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
It's very,
So-
third Wednesday is the 21st. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, so that will impact our ability to meet in December, and in which case we would want to move before that or have something ready.
Right, yeah, that's what I saw, that our next meeting is showing up as January, and I went, oh.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And Councilor Semple, you were implying that maybe there would be a chance after you guys meet again to
Right.
comment on as it develops, we would
Right.
have maybe a more, not just based on what we've seen today, but how it's moving, we could comment later.
I think it's gonna move pretty well because of the precedent of the Clear Lake over.
Yeah.
You know, that council's already been through that and it was so well done that it was easily accessible to see that this is a good thing. So I think that will help a lot. I don't see this as something that's gonna get stuck. So now council said, okay, you know, go write this up. You've got the Clear Lake thing to start with. Staff is so overburdened, but it's definitely going forward, and I don't, that I'm aware of, see any, you know, big roadblocks or outrage about it.
But still, we could contribute a
But it
supportive plan.
never hurts to say, yes, we're glad to see you're doing this overlay zone. It's important.
But I like adding your comments about the other thing, so we could have a brief letter that says that very clearly, but also reminds them, also has a brief paragraph about the other things we're pushing them on, so they realize that we are pushing for those things.
Would somebody like to move to draft that letter, and could we, I guess we can't draft a letter that we haven't, or we can't approve a letter we haven't written, so how do we do that before January?
Can you do that? Via email?
We're not gonna be looking at it before then, really.
No.
So we could write it, approve it in January and send it right then. It would still get to us before the end of January.
So somebody could draft it, maybe,
Sure.
could you do that, since you have it, great, could you have that other paragraph?
And if for some reason, you know, in those 8 weeks, something has progressed with it, then we will know, we will change it.
We want a motion for the record.
I invite you.
I so move as discussed, that Luis on our behalf will draft a letter for review and hope for approval at the January meeting.
A second.
Yeah.
Discussion.
Yeah, I'm still have something to say. Were you referring to the letter we wrote in the past about air quality? Okay. I just want clarification. Exactly. Thank you. I agree.
So,
I would just add, if it seems to fit as you're doing your draft, I like the point that you made also about working with the current people, current businesses in the area, and ensuring that we're, considering their perspective as well.
I'd like to also point out that I just kind of looked around on the internet about Jake H. Baxter, because I know this has been going on for a long time. And there's an article from September 23rd this year that said cleanup of West Eugene yards contaminated by J. H. Baxter toxins delayed until early 2023. And they admit that they found a lot more dioxins than they thought. DEQ pushed the cleanup to next year after finding toxins deeper in the soil this summer.
they don't know how much.
So, and it's taken like years to get some action on this. So anyway,
Well, thank you all. We have a current motion on the table. I'll approve the motion to draft a letter for approval in January. Any opposed or abstentions? No. Unanimous support. Thank you all.
I have one last comment, which is, procedurally, this isn't the way we like to do things, having something brought up as an action item that we haven't seen before. So we usually do delay a month. So it's nice that this got delayed a month anyway. We don't need a committee to do it, but it is nice that we have the chance to discuss it, get presented about it, draft something, and then approve that. So I was a little concerned about the expectation that we would do something today. So I'm glad that it didn't come out that way.
I think we're more saying we support the effort that they're putting into this and encouraging them to go forward more than we're saying we're supporting the exact letter as currently written, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And I think connecting it to the previous air quality recommendations that this body has sent a few times to council. For those who were not on the commission at that moment, I'm happy to share those back out. If you haven't seen them. Yeah,
I just want to support what Art just said. I admit when I looked at this agenda and all this stuff on here, I was a little stressed out, wondering, it's like, are we supposed to know enough about this to really take action and do this stuff? And so, so I think it's helpful knowing that we plan to have consideration of an item before action. And I don't know if it's helpful to note on here what the agenda items are for, if it's information, if it's, debate, if it's action, it's an action item, what it would say that.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you are meaning, the action item? You mean for commission in January?
Yeah, well, I'm talking more generally now about, like I said, I wasn't clear whether we were expected to take action on this item in some way tonight. And maybe I should have been clear, sorry, but I just, I wasn't clear. And so if that's the ground rule that we're going to follow, we won't be expected to take action on something that comes up the first night. We can all just know that, then that's fine. If that's not, otherwise I say there is, some organizations will note on the agenda what the agenda item is, if it's an information item, if it's a debate, or if it's an action item.
I understand.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm happy to make the agenda do whatever is most useful. And so like for the climate friendly to say this is for informational purposes for the commission, or I'm happy to add that to the agenda. And I think the letter is something, if I'm correct, was sent Monday or Tuesday. So
Right,
it was
wouldn't have
before
made
the
it.
agenda had, or after the agenda
agenda.
went out to you, I
Yes.
could have provided the agenda, but yeah.
So like for next month, an action item will be to consider this letter and approve it. So that's.
Yes.
I'm happy to add that. to the
Note
agenda.
that yesterday.
Yeah, I see. So, and I think we've got a unique circumstances in this one that's more accelerated because there isn't a December meeting.
Right.
And so we've got that gap meeting. And I think that's why we're feeling a sense of, and good, the counselors in the room to say it's probably not going to come up quite that soon yet anyway. So, but just remember, we've got a gap between meetings, and in most instances, we would have an opportunity when something's pretty timely and percolating to still come back to it the very next month, not 2 months out, which is what our situation is on this one. And we're, pretty sure that'll be fine.
We may even tell groups or issues that arise that they should expect that process from us. Group shouldn't get in touch with us the week before and say, hey, here's something we want you to approve next week. No, I mean, I don't think that does the group well in terms of what we are and how we're supposed to be relating to. We've done it a few times because sometimes there's some real emergency issue. But I think we want to be more the informed and respected advisor, not just somebody that's sending off stuff, as you know.
Yeah, I would say in the past, it's been a problem because we did need 2 months, to bring it up and then bring it back. And so sometimes that would bring us after the fact. So my point is, yay, congratulations, let's keep doing this, in advance of things. This is, it's always better to come from a solid position than just seat of your pants. Oh my gosh, let's do this. Good.
Can I ask one follow-up before we move on, since we still have 2 more minutes before our next agenda item? Which is Councillor Semple, when you had a work session on this, again, it's this question of applying it to specific parts of the city and sort of a targeted approach versus a citywide approach. And it seems like Beyond Toxics is approaching it much as they did the Clear Lake overlay zone, which is very targeted to specific zones to address specific concern. And it sounded like there was council interest in a broader approach. Do you feel like there's?
We're gonna go to all this trouble of writing it and saying, this is what we want to have happen here, that why would we want it to be different anywhere else in the city? So I'm not interested in duplicating efforts, and I think this will be very well researched. There'll be lots of engagement. So my hope is that, yeah, it would just be city, a citywide thing. I think we discussed that a little bit. So I can really only tell you at this point what I would say, which if it's good here, it's good for everywhere.
And I think that note that Zach made about, industrial doesn't want to be next to residential and residential doesn't want to be next to industrial, and that will make sense anywhere in the city. Would this commission be interested in framing our letter of support of the general concept of this work, like to direct our support in one way or the other?
Well, we think the separation of those uses is a positive thing, and clearly.
Yeah, and maybe it would be applied citywide as a logical step.
Yeah, I would say, to put it that way, to say we certainly support pursuing it here, and it seems to make sense to look at it as a citywide concept.
Okay, thank you for that feedback.
Good.
Why would we not want it?
Yeah, and my guess is there, reason why they're targeting 97402 is because that's the area of the most damage.
Yes.
And that's so
And the
where more
demographic.
people would be likely to go.
Yeah, they're not gonna be doing this in the South Hills.
Okay, well, thank you all. I will bring a draft of that letter back to the commission in January. And with that, as a group, we are right on time. Let's go. For commissioner and staff updates. We'll start with you.
What about the letter?
Oh, we skipped that. We're behind.
Oh, no.
All right, we'll do it quickly. Thank
Sorry,
you.
I have the ClickNotes version of the update.
Yes, okay, so in your packet, you did receive a draft letter of support. Pull it up in my own notes. Know what I'm saying. Will be on page, the last page of your current meeting materials, and the memorandum, which is now on the board, thank you, Ian, is in a letter drafted in support of the proposed ordinance to prohibit fossil fuel infrastructure in new low-rise residential buildings. This is the ordinance coming up in front of council very soon, specifying electrification of new residential buildings.
It's a hearing and it's on Monday.
It's a hearing and it's on Monday.
Yes.
Anyone read the letter? Does anybody have any feedback, concerns, questions? Who's Karen?
Oh, comment, I have a comment.
Oh, I do.
I think it's really good. Thank you so much for your work in doing that, and I just want to point out that in my natural gas bill, I keep getting crazy stuff. Like postcards to send to the council and major propaganda. Darn it, I was gonna bring it in to show you. But they're really hammering it hard.
Major.
It's major.
Noted.
There you go.
Okay,
Okay.
Karen,
So
Dennis, and then.
I'm guessing we sent something out.
I think Karen's comment is why it's important for the council to hear from, a citizen advisory body at this time.
Right.
Mhm.
I would suggest that somewhere, and I'm looking at it, maybe the end of the first paragraph to, because I'm not seeing it as clearly as I'd hope, is that such an action, in the recovery ordinance would be, consistent with existing cap point two goals and prior commission recommendations. So somewhere, make sure we've got in prior commission recommendations, because it's certainly in the electrification letter that went last year. And I somewhere in our notes, our references, it's been there since 2018.
Mhm.
That the commission has been, recommending action of this kind. So somewhere in the letter, including that kind of language would be my recommendation.
Ian is on it, updating in real time.
Look at that.
Meet the goals, well, I guess the climate action plan, the climate recovery ordinance. And was that your?
And consistent with prior commission recommendations.
Mhm.
Yeah, 'cause we've sent
Is
letters.
that enough, or do we want anything more specific?
I think that makes the statement clearly,
So CRO to cap 2.0 and consistent.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Important step to reduce.
We also
worked on
wanted-
it for years.
We also wanted to make sure we added language noting that, by not adding dual fuel systems into a home, there's a cost savings opportunity there. For developers.
Yeah, is that not in here? I
We need
said
a-
about it.
We need a verb there in that sense.
Oh,
No, I'm just saying, because it says important step to reduce carbon emissions, to meet the goals and
and
be
to
consistent.
meet the goals. And to meet the goals of the city CRO cap 2.0 and
Get rid of that and. There we go. Meet the goals of the city's climate goals.
Yeah.
Cap 2.0 and be consistent with prior.
does that feel okay?
Okay. I just. trying to
Any
parse
other
that sentence.
comments or feedback, Jan?
What was the one that you were just saying?
It's now up on the
No,
screen.
no, I thought there was another piece.
Dual fuel.
Oh, no, I was just saying that was something we wanted to make sure it was in there. It is a sentence, it's already in there. Because it's cheaper to construct all electric
Okay.
homes, this ordinance will help reduce housing costs. So there was a
I guess
goal to add an equity.
I really like what you just added. That was something, I felt like we needed to say that too, something about this. We have some history on this. That we know. And I guess I wanted to see something a little bit stronger on the leadership question, maybe at the closing. Something perhaps like, we encourage you to continue the city of Eugene's leadership on this issue or something. I feel like they're, again, we used to be leaders on these things, we adopted these plans early and we really.
Maybe we should say it's about time that you reestablish your leadership.
And without saying that we know they're facing pressure, and they're gonna have to be a little bit up to step up and do it, so.
Is there a specific request for an update? To that?
Playing with it. So Jan, what I'm thinking you're getting to is playing with that last line and
Yeah.
making it.
Making it strong, the close a little stronger.
Does it get it by saying thank you for your past and
Continuing.
continuing leadership?
Thank you for your continuing leadership on this issue.
Does that get there, or
I think it's.
we want to get
it helps,
stronger?
Yeah.
Okay,
Strong,
just a single word,
strong,
Better than
continuing.
strong, comma,
Strong
continuing.
and continuing.
Yes, I like it. I was.
Strong and continuing.
Okay.
We know at least one member of the council.
Okay. Thank you for the real-time updates
Very good. Yeah.
and group edits, everyone.
That will conclude.
Continuing.
Continue.
Yeah, present tense and future.
Yes. Well, the continuing implies we'll never stop.
Never stops. Okay,
Why didn't they do this sooner?
well,
I guess.
here we are.
I move that we send this letter as amended.
Thank you, Art.
Second.
We've got a Dennis second, all in favor?
You.
Thank you, commission, passes.
Thank you, Laura.
And thank you, Laura, and
She not go, she left.
she had to go to another presentation, so, the other ask that she made was that the hearing is on Monday evening, is that 5:30?
We have a lot of things happening at that. There's 4 hearings. The first 2 are gonna be pretty quick. Then there's the one about the vibration noise.
Zimbo.
And we think that, you know, could have a number of people there, I don't know, 20. And then the electrification, and if there's enough at the first 3, council's gonna have like a 15-minute break, because it could go on a really long time. The mayor said she's probably going to keep everyone to 2.5, not 3 minutes, and limit it to 3 hours after we come back for the electrification one. And then if it looks
Wow.
like it's longer than that, we'll set up a second hearing. I'm not really looking forward to being, you know, sitting there listening to public hearing for over 5 hours straight. I have an email from some of the Northwest Natural supporters, not Northwest Natural itself, that are planning to, you know, stage outside, so they
Oh, yeah.
comrade to come in and sign up. And I assume that 350 will be here, or I'll be, my mouth will be open. So I'm expecting that it could be quite a number
Boisterous.
of people here.
I didn't realize that they were open to in-person.
It is going to be in person.
Is that a new?
No, we had done everything, you know, Zoom, and then we started doing it in person and on Zoom. We talked about only doing hearings only on Zoom, but we did not decide that. So it will be in person. It's hard because some counselors don't seem to want to show up, but I think it's more difficult, but much more respectful when people come to talk to us that I'm there in person. So,
And the public testimony is only in person or is in person?
no, it's both.
Both, okay.
Again, a process question. When we do reports to council, it kind of, do we end up in the midst of queue? Because Laura also agreed to present the letter on our behalf.
So if a commissioner is in the queue, there is one representative per commission that gets bumped to the front of the line.
Right, so if Laura's going to present the letter on our behalf, we know that's going to happen.
So we're gonna send the letter and she's also gonna read the letter.
That's my understanding.
Okay,
And that, you know, any of us who want to make personal testimonies as citizens, we get
you're in the queue. Yep,
So it'd be important that when she signs up, she says she's as the representative of the commission, so they
Right,
will
as the chair.
make sure that
representing
they
the
put it
commission.
up front.
yes,
Because we have a lot of new people.
yeah, yeah.
My understanding is that the process for signing up for the hearing now is that even, no matter what order you sign up in, there people are randomized.
It's
to do that,
randomized.
So it almost doesn't count to try hard to jump in early because you could still.
It doesn't matter when you sign up, as long as you get there before it ends, the sign up period ends. It will be randomized. They will post the order. So if you know you're number 2, you know to stay there. And if you're number 27, you can go get a snack.
Okay, so to clarify, Laura will present the letter on behalf of the commission. Other commissioners are invited in person or on Zoom to provide support, although you will not be able to jump the line.
Right.
If you're feeling brave, in person, I think may be interesting.
It's so much nicer for us if you're in person.
Yeah. Yeah, and have more impact and show that that's.
I also heard it recommended, it's a good idea to both give your testimony and bring it written and email it, all of the above. Make sure it gets on the record, especially if you know with so many people who can't finish on Monday. You know, you can at least do. That's very interesting.
How come I can't find this on the, like, I'm on the City of Eugene website and this the last meeting of the month is on this today. Which is,
The third Monday is public hearing night.
would that be like on the calendar?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it would be public hearing rather than council meeting.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I have public.
Monday at 5:30. It used to be at 7:30, but they're going on and on and on.
It's possible they haven't updated it yet, because they are,
It's on there.
Okay.
Well, I'm under public meetings calendar.
No, go to council meetings.
Oh, it's council, not.
They should be on the public
Okay.
meeting calendar, but
We'll get to it for that. I do want to acknowledge just we're a couple minutes behind and that we are ready for staff updates.
So we've already talked about two of these things, but obviously there are two relevant public hearings that are going to be on Monday. One was the fossil fuel ban, and then the second was the noise control regulations for those who might have been
What?
interested. The noise control regulations.
What?
noise.
Right into that. Thank you.
Well, I couldn't hear, I really couldn't hear, but that was pretty good.
The other was just to highlight that there's going to be a work session on November 28th that is going to focus on two things that have been put in motion by council, which is the outreach for commercial electrification. And the second was engagement on decarbonization. And staff are going to be presenting a roadmap for how to pursue engagements, largely in a way to try and figure out how to optimize opportunities to be in front of the community, to try and avoid engagement fatigue across a number of things that are on the calendar in terms of climate friendliness engagement. And, you know, there's a lot of things, and we're going to try to put together a framework in front of council to talk about some of that. We're working on the framework as we speak, but it's basically the focus is going to be on electrification and decarbonization for this next work session. Just follow up on the thing that I emailed the commission about last week, which was there was the downtown development session yesterday. If you were not able to participate or show up for that, there should be an online survey. I will send that out to folks if they are interested in getting it, so you can participate that way as well. And the other was just, we're reviewing it internally, but the 2021 greenhouse gas inventory for the community was provided by Good Company a couple weeks ago. We're going through that data. It was interesting. We decided to keep it on the every 2-year schedule. So the last one was in 2019. We kept it mostly because we were curious to see if we'd see like a COVID impact in some way, shape, or form. People working from home, less driving. It does look like, you know, in general, things were down both in 2010 and 2019. On my favorite percentage, because we're still working through some of the data, but it was down, noticeably down. Although transportation still well over 50% of the burden of there, but both building emissions and transportation emissions were both down relative to 2019. So once that's ready, you know, I'll be sure to share it with the commission, but I just wanted to bring it up that we have it. Staff are reviewing it, and you know, it's an interesting way to kind of think about what the future might hold as certain things take hold and more working from home happens, and what that might actually mean in terms of some of the emissions from this community.
Thank you.
And then you will have to investigate carbon offset purchase.
Yes, that's for the operations one.
Right, that's for the operational inventory, not the inventory.
Yes. Well, this is the community inventory.
So the CRO requires the city's operations to be carbon neutral, and anything that's a gap, which is usually what, 6,000 metric tons or so.
It was about 5,300, but yes,
Went down.
yeah, they went down. Another thing that seems to have been impacted by COVID.
So clarifying, Ian, just a little bit, the work session, I was catching notes. So part of it's beginning to discuss with council community engagement.
So broadly, yeah, so there are two motions that is concerning that dealt with. One was community engagement specifically on commercial electrification and engagement with the business community to get some feedback and input on another motion, which is, you know, considering developing an ordinance related to that. And then the second one was engagement on decarbonization. So one is new buildings, and the decarbonization is existing buildings, building off the Good Company presentation from last month, with a specific focus on engagement with historically disadvantaged communities. And the idea is because there's going to be cross-pollination among some stakeholder groups between these things, is to figure out how to design a process that accomplishes both these goals, but also doesn't create undue burdens on, segments of the population.
Right. Well, and I suspect our education committee meeting, which is like right after that date, is what we're looking at, would be very supportive in terms of how we might assist staff in those kinds of outreach.
Yeah, for sure. So is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Ann.
Crystal?
At this
When
time,
was
are
that
there any commissioner updates to share? We got a Karen.
You can go first, Dan.
Was a question on the staff updates. Oh, an update on the staff updates.
On this, the analyst position.
Yeah.
So we're still reviewing applications. So as I mentioned, we had 56 applications. That was winnowed down to 42 in terms of minimum qualifications. I have been working through scoring all of these applications. And it looks like we have 10 really strong candidates. We're kind of figuring out how we want to break things down, but it looks like we might have as many as 10. And so based on that, we'll then figure out what the interview process is going to be. What I think if it's 10, it's probably going to be an initial phone interview and then panel and then a secondary interview, but we're working through it. And I'm hoping sometime early Q1 of next year, we'll have an analyst on staff.
We miss you, Sam.
Is that,
Yeah.
okay.
What about the commissioner spots that are
Ah.
available?
Well, we could do that during commissioner updates. So the one I was gonna provide was that Laura and I did go in front of council on Monday, this very room,
Did a great job.
and shared both our annual report from last year and our work plan for this year. At which point, Counselor Semple was very helpful in nudging the laggard counselors to go ahead and appoint folks to this body, and they shamefacedly agreed that they should work on that. So hopefully we will get some nominations to those positions by the new year. It is obviously the holidays soon. We got some really interesting questions, specific questions from counselors who had particular interest. Offsets came up. Again, and an interest in finding local projects that might achieve the goal of the CRO, but don't require the verified market program. There was some feedback that maybe that counselor hadn't read the memo. But I wanted to ask Ian, since we had specific questions that came up on specific topics, what would be a good next step to re-engage council on those particular topics that they expressed interest in?
I hadn't put a lot of thought into that in terms of the best way to go about doing that. I think I was still processing a little bit some of the questions and whether it made sense for some of those. Figuring out, are they things that become focus areas for future sessions and having presentations on? For example, Councilor Evans had talked about some of the EV infrastructure things. We do have an EV infrastructure plan. Is having Logan tell us come back and talk through some of what, maybe Logan and Rob come back, some state staff come back and talk about where we are, to apprise the commission about where things are going as a way to possibly see if there are gaps or see if there are things that are not being addressed. Obviously climate friendly has EV things related to it as well. So there's a number of things that are new, I think, that maybe aren't as front and center. And some of that was my just not knowing how best to respond to him in the moment on some of these things. For some of the questions, I think the offset question is the question I have that maybe is the biggest, and I'd be curious if the commission's thought on this. Is this something where there be an interest in creating a committee to talk through some of these things? I know you've done work in the past on this. I think one of the things that come up that didn't, I may be misinterpreting this, but I thought the previous discussion was more sequestration based. Offsets, was that a discussion? I think what was brought up on the meeting on Monday is other opportunities to do things like heat pumps and are, investing in things that are more on the demand side and what the opportunity is there and how that might count toward. To me, I think the biggest challenge is because of the language in the CRO, without a CRO change, I don't know what you can do about it.
That was the wall we hit.
That was the problem, right?
And with the verifiable word for both of those, and it's even on the demand side, I don't know what you can do about it at this point.
And the impact of the bang for your buck. It's
Right.
very difficult to get any project that's gonna meet an $8 per metric ton. That's local. And, it'd take a lot of heat pumps.
Yeah, right, that's the problem.
Yeah, and I think even if you could get to that point, I think the challenge is additionality as well.
Right.
Is,
Yep.
if not for, would this have happened, or like, it depends on what you're doing, heat pumps is one thing, but like, let's say you're changing LEDs in your ceiling. Who owns that emission reduction? Do I, if I do it, or does the power plant, because they're the ones who are generating less electricity? And so and there's a lot of that I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's something, particularly if there's a way to figure out how to fold in workforce developments into that conversation, whether it's through installation or something like that. But I think right now that the biggest obstacle is the ordinance, is the CRO. And really not being able to do anything with that without, I would need to talk to the city. There's things I would need to do to clarify with the city attorney, some other things to figure out, like, what is even the process for that?
Yeah, maybe that would be something we could bring back to this body and have a follow-up conversation about what options there might be now that we have an inventory to. Yeah, Jen.
Yeah, that's pretty much in keeping. We kind of went through a lot of those discussions, and we, even looking at some of the things that Councilor Zelenka was bringing up about habitat, and we talked to EWEB and all that stuff. But all that's great. It's just that it doesn't fit the parameters of what the ordinance says we need to be doing. And so if that's an option to change that or look at that differently, then that would make a difference. And I thought the same thing on the electrical vehicles. Some of that territory we covered. We've had a big spreadsheet with all the, current efforts on electric vehicles and where they stood and all that sort of stuff. They talked about parking, but there's things underway, so we have some information about where that stands. But
And I think there are things in the percolator. I know EWEB has been partnering with the county and with LTD and with the city and some other things on going after like Electrify America grants and things like that. As ways to get money in the community to do some infrastructure build out. I think some of that, because it's maybe DC fast charging, is maybe more focused on corridors as opposed to in neighborhoods and communities, but there is progress on the charging infrastructure front as well.
Yeah, that's great. Somewhere you want to hang out for like a little while, not a gas station.
right, that would be
This end of the
a good
gas.
point.
No more. Yes.
No more gas station. Yeah, Karen.
I was just gonna are we done with that part?
Well, I was just sharing the updates from our presentation to council, so if there's no other feedback on that, then sure.
And thank you. And you're doing a great job. You're a good emailer. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're really happy that you're here. I don't know, do you get these emails from the city, state of the city address, January 4th, 5:30? It's wrong.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It'll be packed probably. Anyway,
Okay.
and thank you, Councilor Sample, for all the hard work that you're doing. It's a reality TV show.
I actually thought you all did a very good job in including me in at the meeting, and I also thought the council was pretty appreciative of what the commission.
Yeah, thank you. Councilor Sample, updates from you.
Woo-hoo, I have nothing new to say. You've all covered it, thank goodness. That work session on public engagement, been looking forward to that for a while on both the no fossil fuels and how do we reduce what we already have. And the public hearings, it's going to be an exciting night. I was at the downtown brainstorming on Tuesday night, really good showing, really
Cool.
nice. And was at the farmer's market pavilion, which held a lot of people. It was very pleasant. There was music, there was snacks, and I think we got, I hope, a lot of good feedback. Unfortunately, everyone had dots, and I'm watching what they're doing, and there's all these subjects, and then it's urgent, soon, whenever, and everything was urgent. I don't know quite how much layering we got from that. 3 commissioner places open. I think that councilors 2, 4, and 5 aren't really going to jump up around to look for anybody. So let's find people we think would be good on the commission and make it easy for them, because I think that they don't have anything in the works, and it's silly to have the positions opened.
What happened about Zach Klonowski? I thought you
He
reached back
was
out.
not applying to be on
Yeah.
the commission. It was about something else.
Right, but he was asking
Well,
If we could engage with them, did you engage with them?
Yeah, no, we had a conversation and we were supposed to talk again in December. So his message was not necessarily about being on the commission. He had more general private questions.
I know, but we were like, okay, he would be
So-
really good.
So the process, and this was, I was kind of filtering this to Matt Rodriguez, the public works director, was to give counselors the opportunity to come up with names. As you know, so a letter was sent to them, sent to the entire council. The mayor, city manager, basically saying, hey, this opportunity, it's an opportunity to actually, make, put your mark on this commission. And, if you have people, please recommend them if you want support from staff to help with coming up with names. And I think we're probably at the point where we can start, doing that. Because these are more specific, we don't do a recruitment process for this. That's kind of been the established process for this, but I think we've opened up the opportunity to have staff provide support, but I think we're probably at that point where we can come up with names. So yes, there might be an opportunity to revisit, something like that.
Well, and I'm thinking that maybe it'd be worthwhile to reach out to like some organizations like these. Who show up at our.
Sure.
and a diversity of opinions and diversity in general.
Right.
Should be a goal of this
Right.
body. And I would encourage folks to consider that as well when considering.
I just think that the counselors do not have even a short list of who to recommend. So if we could give them some recommendations, that might be helpful.
Is there a way to get a notice sent out to different organizations around town?
I'll talk to the city manager's office about this just because recruitment has historically been different for this. and
Right.
how they-
Yeah, it's been very different because
So for the 4 at large, it's approved, but with the, the counselor specific appointments, usually they've come up with names. And so sometimes for the at large, they could
it's
recruit.
gonna be a little tricky. I'm
Yes.
not sure how that works. It's the only commission that is like that.
Yes, I know.
The rest are all at large, but anyway.
Okay.
Get some more people here to eat those cookies. So if you didn't go to even if you did go fill out the survey, it's really quick.
Thank you.
Probably farm. Yes.
Sure. So it's Eric Brown, who's the planner for downtown. So there's a survey associated with that downtown development.
It's online, I think.
Yes, if you didn't get to go, you can take a survey on.
Oh,
Very short, please do it, because downtown is my thing. If you want to feel good about the work you did, go online to the meeting page and go to the agenda for Monday's work session. And we had 3 commissions, sustainability, human rights, and police, and they all submitted their work plans and their reports. You guys rocked it. Seriously, we've already seen the great work plan and the report, but to then have, these are the letters we sent. Here they are right now, the dates, this is what we said, coming right after, this is our work plan. This is, what we did, and here it is. Some other things say, let's send recommendations to council, and I'm like, I don't think I got any, so. We really did a lot of work and the proof was right there. So, if you want to compare yourself to other commissions, that's where you can.
Thank you, Council.
And I thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Oh, Jan. thanks.
Well, yeah, because when I went back and I did watch the meeting afterward and like I said, I appreciated it all very much. It occurred to me, I stayed and watched the Human Rights Commission. I was curious as to what was going on with them these days. And so I'm wondering, it makes me wonder if maybe you could reach out to the staff for the Human Rights Commission and the staff for the neighborhood associations and ask them how to reach out to their groups about if they have people that they might want to nominate for commissioners.
Yeah.
Because that would be a good, perhaps, way to get some people beyond
Cross-pollinated.
our usual suspects. I mean,
Thank you, Jan. I wanted to ask, before we close for the evening, there was one sort of quirk which came up, and it might be a process change going forward, but it was this updated expectation from the city manager's office that our committees would be approved by council instead of just by ourselves.
Wow, that was so interesting.
That's
It sounds
crazy.
like-
Yeah, and so if folks have a couple minutes of patience, just to let Ian, maybe if you could just tell us your back and forth with the city manager's office and what you're hearing going forward.
So I'll read the language from the ordinance because this was pointed out to me when I submitted the documentation for the work session. And it says, and this is part 4 of the ordinance, no formally constituted committee of the commission may be created unless the purpose, scope, and tenure of the committee is included in the annual work plan and is approved in advance by the city council. And so
Could they come up?
I
With our way of operating.
brought this up. And so I think from what I understand is there's an interest from the city manager's office to try and create a little bit more structured order. And so I had some feedback from the city manager's office on the AIS and some other things tied to this meeting. And I brought up, said I'm new here and I'm sure I've missed a lot of things, but in the past, I know that, committees have been stood up as they've been needed. Sometimes you don't know at the beginning of a calendar year what you're going to do. So what is the process? Like, we're happy to talk about the education committee. We've talked about it, it's been approved, we're ready to move forward with that. What is the process that you do throughout the year? Does that mean I have to guess? Like, do we have to, figure out what we're gonna do ahead of time? And the response was they wanted to talk to the city attorney office and figure out, based on the ordinance being written, it seemed like it could be done through a consent, some sort of consent motion where literally something is done. It's a sentence or two, it's put in front of council, and you basically.
It totally should be part of a consent agenda. This is pretty easily fixed and
I think
it's.
that hopefully is the easy fix, and then I don't think it's a huge burden, other than there's just some paperwork I have to do. And
It's not representing how the commission actually has been working, so that just needs to be.
What I was told is that non-compliance over the last 10 years was an excuse for.
Or maybe it was temporary versus formal committees. I was wondering if we just kept setting up temporary committees.
Right, that's what I was thinking, can we call study groups?
We did whatever CM told us.
Sure. So yeah, do you have a final thought?
This goes back to like 2010,
Yeah, since the original commission.
Well,
yeah,
and
and the original bylaws.
it might be interesting to point out that under all of that time, it was under the city manager's office. So
Yes,
they didn't-
I noticed the difference too.
And, yeah. So
You didn't say
would that hold us up from having those committees start, because then at least there is some delay time by the time you put it on.
I think the process needs to be fleshed out. I think there is a process that can be put in place that shouldn't be, but yes, I think what that means in terms of timing is something that will need to be clarified as well.
So the education committee, and our education outreach committee was formally approved by council. That can go ahead and get started. We're not meeting in December, so we do have a little bit of calendar time. But
I don't know if Laura had emailed folks, but Brian Richardson, who's the public information officer in Public Works, had surgery last week, and so he's out through Thanksgiving. But the thought was to try and set up something for him to go through a lot of the engagement work that's been done. It's kind of to try and set that up in early. And you might not be on it, but I think Laura had emailed the committee.
December.
Yeah, trying to do something in early or late November, early December to do this presentation.
Okay,
I
great.
just want to make sure that, so it's no commission meeting, but the committee is good.
Okay.
It's a super quick question. So this is an ordinance that's always been there, it just hasn't been followed, or this is a new ordinance?
No, the ordinance is from 2007.
The original.
Yeah, it's the ordinance that established the commission, yeah. And so this is basically a standing committee and because, so it's established by ordinance, so it's not something that stood up to address a particular issue and then it disbanded. It's basically, a permanent committee.
Is that true of the other commissions as well?
I'd have to go look at their
So interesting.
establishing language.
All right.
Ongoing perks. Okay, being that it is exactly 7:50 and we've been killing it on time all night, I hereby close tonight's meeting. Thank you all for your time tonight.
So Emily, this picture,